beloveds. I am so honored to be joined by a dear friend, Reverend Gabrielle Fields, who is helping us dig deeper into the conversation that was started last week about how to recognize our grief and display our lament the more we learn about our changing climate. And then what does it mean for us to come together as community so we can do some compassionate meaning making of our ecological grief and lament. Welcome, Gabrielle. How do you find your soul today?
Thank you for having me. Welcome everyone. And Ellie, I find my soul very joyful because the sun is out, and in Ohio, that's a gamble some days, as the season changes, and it's warm, and some people were being kind earlier, so I find myself in a good spot on this Thursday. What about you?
I love it. Yeah, well, I'm in the southwestern part of the state. It is definitely warm. I have my fan going next to me, but the sun is bright. And what you don't get to see on the other side of the screen is my office is slightly elevated, so I can see the Sky Islands, which is made up of the mountain ranges that consist of the Catalina Mountains. We have the Rincon Mountains, the Santa Rita Mountains, the Tucson Mountain Range.
Oh, wow.
I'm surrounded by mountains and saguaro. So that's what I get to see out my
In
window.
your office? I'm jelly. That's what's
Yeah,
up.
yeah, we got to
Wow.
get. We're gonna do a live in person nurture the soul someday, and we'll do it in Tucson somehow. So yes,
Cool, 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 cool.
curious. I know a little bit about you, but I would love for you to take this moment to share a little bit about yourself. Like, where are you from, and how did you become engaged in the work that you find yourself called to do now?
Oh, okay. I am a St. Louis native, born and raised. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and have been here since February 2019. I moved here for seminary. I went to Methodist Theological School in Ohio, up in Delaware, and stayed in Delaware for about 5 years, until moving to Columbus proper January of last year. And it was, I didn't think about this until I was prepping for this webinar. um, I mean, I shared it over and over again, but I didn't make the connection to our conversation today, to my origin story, I would say, around these topics. Is when I was doing CPE in Cincinnati, that summer I did my first elective for classes, and it was called Food, Faith, and Land Formation. And it was the class that I was taking at the same time that I was doing CP. So all I'm talking about is grief and lament and grief and lament. And I'm sitting up here, in my first class and making connections. And this connection didn't come until my last semester of seminary. Right. So I didn't make the connection of grief and lament to our climate or our global issues right now. But by the time I got done, I was like, this is the gap. This is the gap. And then so I did a CP and took Food, Land, and Faith Formation. And at that time, Dr. Heber Brown guest taught the class, and he's the founder of the Black Church Food Security Network. And so he taught the class from a very different lens than the professor who usually taught the class. Dr. Brown is more of an organizer. He was a pastor, and he taught the class from a lens of essentially Black people and foodways, and how how our foodways developed in the States, and but specifically using Black churches, and how Black churches were involved, and through that connection, I went down a rabbit hole and found myself. MTSO has a 10-acre farm, and so I have a couple professors who. As to get those who had no relationship with the land to start to explore and have a relationship with the land, the only way to get any type of extra credit, right, if that even existed, was to go put your hands in the soil. So, you would get, something, Dr. E would make something up. It wouldn't be like you get an A on something, but you'd get something that would help out if you. And so I began to become compelled to spend time outside, in a way that was very different. I was a city kid before, and city girl, I mean, just cityfied. Everything was city. And so my relationship to land, my relationship to just nature before it even got to food and food ways and agriculture was there in seminary.
I, and thank you for sharing that too, because I'm
Hmm.
thinking about there's Richard Scarry is an old
I know what you're
children.
talking about. So, yep, yep, yep.
And I remember there was the story of the country mouse and the city
And the
mouse.
city mouse. Yep.
Yeah. And I grew up in the country. I grew up in a rural community in central Pennsylvania originally, and we had cornfields surrounding us. And I lived on a farm. I would
Hmm.
say that my dad, now that I'm older and more honest about it, I would say that my dad was the Robert Frost of farmers, except he didn't write poetry. And so we just had cows. I think we had a pig at one point. I know we had, the fruit and vegetable gardens for a while. And then I remember one time learning at like what my dad did to the cows after we had them,
Uh-huh.
um, meaning they got butchered. And so then I like like I became a vegetarian for a little bit. And
Uh-huh.
then my little sister decided to go out and name the cows that we had. She gave them names, and they were endearing names like Frisky and Whiskey. So that way, that was it. My dad never had a cow butchered again. They became our pets. And so I grew up on a farm, lots of cats, lots of, farmland around me. And, like thinking about like traditional rituals like Halloween, we didn't do trick or treating because there were miles and miles and miles between us. And so
Hmm.
the only friends I had were the friends at school, and it would be if we actually had time to get
Hmm.
between our houses. Like my bus ride was 45 minutes to school because of, and the school was right down the street, but we had to go pick everybody else up, right? And
Mm,
that
okay, okay.
city life that you talk about, you and I've known each other for some time now, and so you grew up in the city, which meant that your neighbors were closer, right? Proximity was
Yes.
and stuff. I'm curious, how has that formed you, being so close in that city block radius to folks?
So, Ellie, I have learned now, I do not think, and I want to preface this by saying, I do not think that the way that I was raised or I grew up is um better or that other people have not. But I've learned in spaces when I'm having conversations with others that it's very unique in how I explored and was connected to my neighbors. So I had the kind of parents where one, I also learned that we did not connect to our neighbors until after my immediate neighbor, like next door neighbor, had moved in. So the house became for sale. And it was a young man. He had just graduated from college and he had bought his first house. And his parents helped him move in. And he eventually became an extension of our family because he was younger. My mom and dad were like 10 to 12 years older than him. And so we kind of looked out for him. And then eventually he got married. He was like, I'm getting ready to go propose, you all. And by now, Maury is he's family. So we're like, oh my goodness, you're gonna go propose to somebody? Okay, great. And then she's gonna move in. And we were like, okay, so we're just having anticipation and waiting. And then finally she moves in. And then me and my brother are like, she mean? Like, we don't like her. But that's only because we were standing at the bus stop and we were waving, and she never waved back. And we were just like, I don't, we don't know. So the jury was still out, right? And so we come to find out later, as we, start to spend time with her, that Dee couldn't hear. Like she barely can hear. And in the morning, she's not, a morning person. So we got to know her, got to know them, and eventually they would travel for work. So if Maury was out of town, Dewana ate dinner with us. And if Dewana was out of town, Maury ate dinner with us. And it went from there. So as they started to nest and figure out life, they started to venture out and talk to more neighbors. Well, at this time, my brother and I were the only kids on the block, and we had the kind of father who and mother where we were not only responsible for our house, but the other houses on the block. Now, we had a shorter block, so it was only six houses. And bear with me, I'm going somewhere, folks. It was only six houses, okay? When it snowed, we shoveled the whole block and we cleared everybody's porch. When my brother cut grass, he cut everybody's. He only got paid from others if they did, because my dad was like, that's your service to community. He was like, and then so once we started interacting more with our, neighbors because they're now my godparents because I have two younger twin sisters. And so through relationship, my parents asked them to, be the godparents of my twin sisters. And so we started going out with them. My dad barbecues, and there's this woman in community. Her name is Sharon. And Sharon got wind that my brother was cutting grass in the community. Now, the blocks were perpendicular. So Sharon lived on the next block, just, perpendicular to my block. And she said, Mr. Fields, now she was short in stature. She was known to have a lot of fire. She was a white woman. And she was known to get everybody together in community. Okay. She was known, but she did not like kids. Okay. Hear me. She did not like kids. But she learned that my father would not pay my brother to cut anybody else's yard. She said, well, you don't get to control what he does over my yard. He will pay. He will be paid. He's going to come over here and cut. My dad said, well, that's completely fine. What you do in your house is your business. So she said, okay, right? So then she starts sharing with others on this block that he cuts grass and you all are going to pay him. And then he started having business on Saturdays, right? And I began to house sit and dog sit because, I was like, my brother is doing the yard work. She was like, okay, I'm going to put you to work. Well, I turned 16 and we're driving and she's walking her dog Murphy, and me and my mom drive past, and whenever we see her, we stop. And so she says, you're 16 now? You want a job? Because my mom was like, yeah, we're looking for a job. She said, I don't know where. You'll work in Mark's law firm. I'll call you on Monday. And that's just how she worked. Okay. Now, she took this into community. She didn't like kids, but whenever there was eggs to be dyed, Sharon opened up her home because she realized not everybody likes their home open to their neighbors. So she would open up her home. There was a rule though, if you were a child, you must be accompanied by an adult. Because Sharon, I keep telling you, there was no secret that she would do all the kids' things, but she did not like kids. Pumpkin carving, Halloween, all of the things would happen, at Sharon's house. Fast forward a few years later, I moved, the blocks changed a little bit because life happened. I moved, and then, we hit this presidential election. And then my godmother and I happened to be home one time and we gathered with the neighbors because we were all very close. Now, we were the kind of neighbors, when I say it was unique, is because when there were holidays, our neighbors joined us. You're right. Somebody was having something, or if there was a birthday, it was just an assumption that your neighbor was going to be there. Now, it wasn't always every little thing, but if it was something big, it was on our social calendar because we took care of each other. We looked out for each other. We joked that we should all just connect our backyards, with a door because we were always together, and we checked in on each other. And so you fast forward with this type of dynamic. Some years later, my godmother and I happened to be home. And we get with my uncles, Tom and Shane, like everybody, we get together. But who wasn't there was Sharon. And I had asked and thought that was very weird. I said, has anybody talked to Sharon? And they said, no, no one has talked to her since the election. Now, Ellie, during the election, or during this time, Facebook is where everybody could, not even just the election, but during COVID, everybody took to social media for connection. And Sharon shared how she felt about everything on social media in ways that I took to my family group chat and said, why didn't anybody tell me that Sharon was racist? So then I had someone in family group chat say, oh, this is just Sharon being Sharon. And then I had an even deeper problem. And I was frustrated and I was hurt because I then carried that into, did Sharon ever love me? Because of the things that I was reading on social media and everything that I had formative, and made and understood about community and how you show up in community and how you love someone, even when you don't like someone, like everything just I was hurt. I was in tears because I love me some Sharon. I went to bat for Sharon. Sharon is the reason I love a good Bordeaux. Sharon is the reason that, she tell folks, you 21 now, you can go down to the cellar and pick whatever bottle you want, and I left my purse that day because I was so happy I left my bottle of wine and walked around the block. Sharon was a part of my heart space. And so when she wasn't at dinner and everyone had told me that no one has talked to her since the election, Ellie, I was furious because I said, this is a problem, and the way that we talk about our neighbors, Sharon is still my neighbor, even though I'm struggling with whether or not Sharon like ever loved me, like truly, right? And I had to, I sat with it and I kept saying, Sharon, regardless of how Sharon felt before she showed her true colors, it didn't keep Sharon from showing up for us. And as soon as Sharon showed who she really was, we abandoned her. And it did something, and it was in this grief and and that I was exploring and trying to figure out and understand that I began to have more conversations. And so it became formative for me, and one, how to be in community, but also how to wrestle with your neighbor when they don't show up in ways that you think they should show up in order to be in close proximity to you. We have so many requirements. And so that was a long story, but I believe in storytelling to help situate, you know, essentially how we ground ourselves, right? Because we can go intellectual so quick, and this is hard work. Grief and lament is hard work, and so that is where my hard work started. While I was in school, because I was hurt and I miss her, and I still haven't. She's nowhere to be found or to be seen, and I wrestle with with how folks in community, still showed up. So I don't know if they even answered the question, but that was the story that came to mind when you asked about my form. Being in the city, oh, that was it. Being in the city. So that was it. And the city for me was that close proximity. I was close to everybody. Sharon had everybody, outside of their homes in block parties. Sharon organized block parties. She organized literally anything we all did in community really came down to Sharon making sure it happened. And so my relationship to my neighbors were our family. They are family. And I the reason that it is a part of my work today is because with all of the shift and everything that happens, we have to figure out how to wrestle, how to, grieve out loud, how to grieve in community and not disengage when things don't go our way. And so that is how I got to this work. Is how do I keep people re-engaged? How do I continue to re-engage? Because I'm not perfect. I still haven't talked to Sharon, because I'm trying to figure out all of the things, right? I don't know where she is. I'm not on Facebook, but that's how I got to this work today and how it formed um my understanding now.
And that's huge, Gabrielle. Thank you for sharing that story. Like I remember driving home or going home for the first time in many years at the very
Hmm.
start of the pandemic, and
Hmm.
um, seeing the flags that were being flown, right?
Hmm.
And one flag versus that was a political candidate versus a non-political candidate, but you can assume from the flag who they, all of that stuff. And I'm like, I'm surprised and not surprised kind of thing, and I know that
Hmm.
you and I were sharing a little bit earlier. I'm hosting this book study at the church where I get to be the associate at, and we had
Hmm.
this presenter, Reverend Caleb Campbell, on a couple weeks ago, where it talked about loving your Christian nationalist neighbor, right? And one of
Hmm.
the things that he says is to study the culture, right? So it sounded like you all were studying your culture, meaning who was living in your community, who were you
Hmm.
next to, how did
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
Then the second part he offers is setting the table, right? To show
Mm.
how do you, he says a better way of living a life is to invite people to join you by leading with hospitality and cultivating healthy relationships with your mission field, your neighbors, yourself, and God. And he spends some time in the book talking about how do you do that in those
Yeah.
situations. So
That's perfect. Ellie, that's like so on time for something that I've been thinking about because a lot of times people are asking, like why is this the conversation when we're talking about environmentalism and when we're talking about, anthropogenic climate change and all and I tell them, oftentimes because it deals with relationship. You can't get people to change their relationship until they understand that one, their relationship with themselves and their relationships with that which they other, right? And if you don't understand that, then they can't engage from a place that you're asking them to because they're grieving what it is that they have to give up. And I love the points that this gentleman makes because that's exactly what you have. Like I've been doing in my neighborhood. Like I'm just now settling in community, right? And so I'm doing what I did at before I'm studying like the in the alley. There's a lot of traffic in the alley. Rather than be skeptical and angry, get to know what's happening, what's their names, who are they, my partner, jokes about, the gentleman who comes, he want to make sure your grass cut, you good, he checking in because if you take care of community, community takes care of you. We know our neighbors' names. I wonder how many people know all of their neighbors' names, just their names.
Right.
There are people who do not, you may know your immediate neighbor to the right or left if you have them, but do you know their children? Like I knew, Michelle, who did not ever come out of the house, but if Michael was on the front porch, her two kids, my mom would make sure that they had a snack till mom came home, and we sit out on the porch. She said, "You go sit on the porch until Michael's moms get home." She won't allow him to come over. So you're going to sit on the porch and make sure that he has company until his mom comes home. You understand what I'm saying? There's ways to be in community. And when you study your culture of your community, you find ways to show up, and I love what he said because that's very important to study without judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when in this conversation, right, we're talking about the environmental
Right.
refinement that happens, but
Hmm.
how, like, if we were to really be, I'm not a musician, but I consume music, right? Like my iTunes is full of songs that I'll never be able to own, because you can't own music anymore. Um,
Hmm.
and so I feel that way about the environment. Like this morning, I spent about 15, 20 minutes outside in the new yard that I have. I'm surrounded again by the mountains and the saguaros, which means that I get javelina and deer and
Yeah.
rabbits,
Yeah.
all the birds and stuff like that. And for the first 15 of those 20 minutes, the bird songs
Hmm.
that were different, and watching my dog and I both look in the same direction at the different sounds that were coming, like I felt like, okay, what do I need to do? I immediately thought, what do I need to do in this yard to keep the birds humming? And not for
Hmm.
my enjoyment, but to give them what it is that they need to be nourished. So that way we can be neighborly to each other. Brioche has learned not to chase the quail. Brioche is my little dog, in case anybody didn't know her name. But she doesn't chase the quail. She doesn't chase the bunny rabbits. Pigeons, I don't know if I've trained her not to. I might have trained her to chase pigeons
Okay. Okay.
a certain way, but like it's about building relationship with everything that's around us. And our environment teaches us what to be in sustainable community looks like in so
Hmm.
many ways.
Hmm.
And I say this a lot too. It also teaches us how to grieve, because while
Mm.
something is being born, something is dying at the very same time in order for that thing to be born, or order
Mm.
for there to be the community to grow and stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know you and I were talking, and you had said you wanted, just like last week with Lauren, you had a prompt that you wanted to invite our viewers to participate in some way.
Yes.
I think
So
now's
I don't want people to put it in the chat because ultimately, the way that I engage in this work is when we don't have time. I told Ellie I would like for this to be about heart work and not head work, right? And so you have to follow up if you want to go deeper into the head work and all the intellectual stuff. But I use a decological praxis from a professor up at Drew Theological Seminaries, and I the first part of this praxis is inviting you to, herself, what she calls self-reflexivity, but it's just essentially self-reflection. And I want you to just write on a piece of paper. I don't want it to be in the chat because it is yours and it is to hold you accountable for your own thoughts and reflections later. But writing on something, wherever you have something to note take, whether it's on the electronic device that you are on or a piece of paper, if you can grab one, to just write down your neighbors. How many of your neighbors, immediate neighbors, and where you live do you know by name, right? How many of your neighbors do you know by name? When is the last time that you shared something with one of those neighbors? Whether that's a meal, whether that's a little cup of sugar because someone asked for some sugar, or to borrow a tool of some sort, because do people even still do that? When is the last time that you shared something with them? And the reason I want people to do that is because it, it, as we watch systems, vulnerable systems, large vulnerable systems, waver between sustainability, whether that's from us or climate, um, how we survive is how we take care of each other and the natural world. And so if, I mean, just baby steps, you don't have to go there. But so just asking people, how many of your neighbors do you know? If something, we have alarms that sound, the tornado alarms, what if it went off and you were in your house? Do you go see about your neighbor? Do you know that neighbor? Do to call that neighbor to have, so I just wanted everybody to take time just to be able to do that. And that is for you. That is not for us. It is that's literally, I usually do this mostly in retreat spaces, and I find that people are sharing more transparent and vulnerable in retreat spaces, mainly because they feel like their transparency and vulnerability has a soft place to land. It's very hard, it's much more hard, or it's harder in spaces like these, because we bring a lot of stuff as opposed to shedding a lot of stuff and just bringing what's bare. So I just wanted you all to think about that. And in the Q&A later, you can ask questions about it. But I really want us to start getting out of our homes. We don't even worship or participate in community in places where we live anymore, you know? So I wanted everyone to engage in that practice. And I've found it to be very fruitful for people who actually spend time, with it.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned vulnerability, and I'm
Mhm.
curious. I think, and it dawned on me when I was sharing a little bit about my, geographic neighborhood,
Mhm.
and um and probably even how relational I am with people. I'm like, I'm good. I'll give you whatever you need, but you just
Stay over there. Talk
stay over.
about it. Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
Because like it's funny, and where I live now, it is a communal living space. There are multiple property or multiple living units within a property, and the like organizer of it is very, like he was like, whatever you need, just he came over and he goes, do you need help unpacking anything? And then I said, no, you can come on in. He goes, oh my God, you unpacked everything already? I'm like, yeah, I got a nest. And he goes, what are you going to do with your TV? I said, I got to figure out how to hang it up. He goes, I'll hang it up for you. He goes, do you have an Allen wrench? And I was like, somewhere, and I handed him something. He goes, no, I need an Allen wrench. I'm like, this is an Allen wrench. He goes, this is not an Allen wrench. Let's sit down and let me go through all, because I have a toolbox. He's like, this is what this is. This is what this is. Right. And then later his daughter comes over and she's like, my dad wants to know if you have garlic. And I immediately felt guilty because I didn't have garlic. Like I just moved, right? I'm giving myself grace. I just moved.
Right, right.
I'm not somebody who keeps garlic in the house. And here this person was so willing to come and support me. And I was like, well, I'll run to the store and go get garlic real quick. And she's like, I don't think
Yeah.
my dad wants you to do that. Right. And so
But
now
yeah,
being vulnerable, like one, I didn't know what an Allen wrench is, although I knew, I just have perimenopause brain. And then I felt this immediate guilt that I wasn't able to meet the need that neighbor had. And so being vulnerable and being honest with ourselves is difficult and challenging. And so I wonder though, what does being vulnerable with ourselves, with our neighbors, have to do when we talk about the natural environment? What are some things that you can help us understand different?
so mm, I'm thinking that, quite honestly, I think we need to lead from a place, and this is very overused, but I think right now it's appropriate, with curiosity,
Hmm.
as opposed to know. So when you and I'm working with this rough draft, okay? So we approach nature, we approach the outside world as if we know everything already, and not open to what we could learn. And that's a vulnerable space to be in, because those who are educated, you should know a little bit, right? Like there are people who struggle with entering spaces. I mean, and myself to a point where you feel like you should know a little something, right? But when when I tend not try not to use the overused vulnerability, because it's not an easy thing to do for a lot of people, and so, but I think more so with openness and curiosity, and from a place of even if you think you know, right? Be open to what you could learn, right? And that's, people immediately, they will say, um, I can't go outside and garden. I don't know anything about composting. I don't know anything, about recycling, going out in nature. Well, can't afford to water, this, or, there's so many other aspects to just like you said, the participation. It's the participation of what can you participate in, right? And so being vulnerable enough to be able to participate in somewhere where you may not have a strength area, right? And being open to learning about how to participate, and being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know, how can I learn and how can I participate? Right? If you are a scientist, what aren't you good at? And what other ways does someone need help so that you can, maybe offer a tool, right? Like I and I'm leave it right there because I could say the same thing over and over again several times. But I think leading from a place of curiosity about that which you other. And I say other because, that leaves crawling things, bodies of water, land, right? That's everything that you other. I think being open to that. And that's why I tie in the relationship aspect of human, right? Because we will engage in nature before we will engage with humans. And you know far less. We know more about humans than we know about the natural world, so for you to think but anyway, that's
Look, I've walked around in this body for 51 years and I'm still going, wait, I have a pain. What is that? Where is it? What organ? Am I dying? Let me go to WebMD. And then I am dying according to WebMD, right? So it is. I do know already so much more about this backyard that I've been meandering about for just 3 weeks than I do about
Mhm.
my that I've lived in for 51 years, let alone even my ancestors, right? I'm just starting to get connected to the lineage and trying to discover the lineage of my own family. Reverend Tracy Howe, who is the team supervisor for the Faith Info team here at the national setting,
Mhm.
she has this wonderful workshop prompt where she asks us to think of our mother's mother and our father's mother and or even our mother's mother's mother, like how far back can we go?
Mhm.
And I don't know. My mom was a foster child. It was my biological mother. I didn't have an intimate mother child relationship with her. And I know that her mother was incarcerated, and so of course she was separated from her biological mother, even though she was in foster care and never. So like all of so like when I do my lineage, it stops. So I know nothing about what
Mhm.
to build from, right? I don't
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
There's a reason why I am the way I am, just thinking about like who I am. There's a reason why I am this person, but I don't know from what. I'm not the only person who wanted to be a pastor in the family. My mom was a poet. My mom, and she used to get in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where one of her foster placements, she won awards for painting nature scenes on storefront windows, right? She was an
Mhm.
artist.
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
no idea until after she passed that this is something that my mom had done. So I have these similarities in a lot of ways, without fully understanding. My dad being the Robert Frost type of farmer, which the reference is Robert Frost was a horrible farmer because he never got up early enough to do the farming work, right? And so that's what that reference is. Not that my dad
Right,
didn't
right.
get up, but yeah. But his connection to the land is embedded
Mm.
in a way that I can't fully comprehend. And I know that we have um, indigenous American, Native American folks in the lineage as well. But I don't know anything about that. And so I grieve and lament the loss of my human relationship
Mhm.
while honoring what is alive in in thriving in the desert. I think when people come out here, they're like, "Wait, you have farms out
Stuff
there?"
grows in the desert, like yes. That's
Yeah,
why that's why people tell folks don't call it food deserts because there's life in the desert, right? Call it what it is.
yeah.
But that's exactly right. And I'm shocked too when I see what they're growing out in the desert Southwest. I'm like, wow. Like,
Yeah. And
wow.
I'm grieving water. I mean, I'm grieving
Yeah.
water. I live right along the Santa Cruz River. That is no river,
Mm,
you know? So when we talk about grief and lament, when we talk about that vulnerability of being in relationship with our
hmm
natural environment,
hmm
so that way we can be in relationship with the human two-legged forms. I think I love the term that Lauren used last week, the
See
two-legged.
the two-legged.
So I'm curious, where does grief and lament lay in this work for you now?
So the reason this is a part of the broader work I do in agricultural spaces is because eco-feminist theologian Yvonne Jabara and all of her work, she invites folks first to explore their epistemology. How do you know what you know? And that is the part and the fundamental element to me that disrupts people's connection to the rest of the world. And when I say disrupts, it's because when you ask someone to shift that or change that or think of that differently, you grieve what you have to give up in order to make space for that, right? Because, well, some do. I will say some do. Some grieve or lament at the regardless of the process, what it is that they will have to sacrifice in order to take in new things, right? Because then it shifts. If what I have to take in or what I need to learn or understand in order to participate or to change or to do whatever, that means that shifts things about my identity mainly, and that is one of the reason this is a part of my conversation now, because I have some pastors who will say, Gab, what do I do when I have a member who gives the most money to my church and they work for big oil and they don't want to listen to my sermons on anthropogenic climate change? It
Hmm.
won't shift their sermon because that affects their bottom dollar. These
Hmm.
are the conversations that I'm having, that we have to have conversations and create spaces for grief and lament if you want people to shift how they know what they know, and if we don't create space for that in this work, then people will often, what they do is disengage and just and it's easier. So people say, well, they understand this, why don't they just change? We give them this book, why don't they just do this, and it's because of what they will have to sacrifice in order to just acknowledge it, right? There was a senator who took to just the audience, and I refrain from saying his name. I used it in a sermon one time. But he said, I was behind you in climate change, 111%. I believed you until I saw how much it was going to cost. And he
Huh.
did not vote. But I argue and I struggle. Now, with those there, we always have UCC's big and we welcome everybody. But I will say, in Christian theological foundation of Jesus Christ, Jesus first said, give up your stuff. And we struggle in the Christian faith tradition with what we will have to leave behind in order to take on the new. We see it in so many aspects right now. So many. But that's why it's in this space. Because for me, if food is bigger, like you said, in the second part of the gentleman's point is to invite people to the table. That's exactly right. There's been more change that's happened around the table, with food and fellowship, I argue, than not. And anyway, that's where grief and lament for me. When you piss them out, just it means something. When you want people to take in new information, you have to help them grieve what it is that they will have to shift, or what shifts about themselves, their communities, their identity. I did all of that comes into play when you're in community with folks and you want them to just take in new information and new practices. And so for me, it's helping walk with them. We have to walk with people, So I want to create space for those who are not just pastors, but those who are lay members, those who are working in church, who are struggling to say people just don't get it. And I'm like, are you walking with them? Because they won't just get it. It's not that simple. And so walking through grief, and that can look, there are different grief practitioners. There are different people who would tell you what processes to participate in to grieve and to lament. But ultimately, I suggest that the collaborative change happens naturally as you grieve and lament in community. with people, and the things that we want to see change collaboratively will happen as we grieve and lament together. So that's the space that I try to create is for the grieving. What will you lose, by changing what you eat or practices that you participate in, communities that you expand into? How do you wrestle with that? And so it's a very real, very, very, very real thing. And people dismiss it and they disengage and they say, no, it's too much.
It's too much and it's too hard, right? Well, I want to invite, I have one-ish final question for you on the
Okay.
story. Invite folks to share any questions or comments that you have into the Q&A feature, which is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's a dialogue bubble with a question mark in the middle. I invite you to go ahead and use this opportunity to check in with Gabrielle and I now. I just, as a Christian, as a practicing Christian, whatever that means, I don't know. We had this whole debate yesterday during the book study of Disarming Leviathan, which was,
Mhm.
I follow Christ, but I'm not a Christian. I'm like, so wait, you mean you follow Jesus, right? Because the Christ part
Mhm.
is right, following Jesus, whatever, blah blah blah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, as a practicing Christian, our most recent holiday celebration, Holy Week,
Mhm.
centered on Jesus sitting at the table with friends and foes, grieving and lamenting the journey that got them there, celebrating and loving, grieving and lamenting the betrayal that had happened. And still everybody was at the table together, and we have that model of what can come together when we're all at the table together. And however it is that you as a Christian practitioner view, Resurrection Sunday, it is about the resurrecting relationship with our holy, resurrecting relationship with our family and our friends and with the land and stuff like that. And so I think it's funny, we have these big old holidays and then we find the work actually difficult to do, which I get. Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't have said,
Yes,
oh,
because
stay over there.
exactly, because and the point that when you talk about the table on Monday, Thursday, Jesus said one of you will, right? He knew, right? It's not to say that no one at the table that you invite people won't hurt you. That's not what this is about. It's staying at the table through the hurt, right? But you can't get there if you don't explore first, right? Like what would cause you to disengage? What would cause that harm to hurt you so much that you don't come back to the table? Right? Because Jesus didn't care. He's like, I'm gonna show up anyway. Now we're not Jesus. I think, we're just not. I thank God that God is God, and I am not. But that's why the step one is the exploration of self, because we immediately go to they, you. What I language do you need to participate in more? Jesus participated in his I language. He used I language. What do I need to explore about myself before I go to the table? Because it's not enough to open up a table. People open up their table and say, people have the nerve to do X, Y, and Z. No one said that they would not show up as themselves. That's what I argue about Cher. She showed up as herself. It's just we didn't know what to do because we had not done that work. We haven't done your own work. So I like that, Reverend, because I use that to say Jesus knew and he still showed up. What does that say about our faith? you know?
Right, right. That part. You know, thank you. Amen. I feel like I've been to church. I appreciate that on
You so
Thursday.
silly. You so silly.
We have a viewer question that said, what trust building and community practices do you find most effective for making space for the grieving that you're talking about?
So one of the things that I do in community, especially when I am invited in spaces to do this work, I am one who likes to spend time first exploring the culture of that community and the trust building practices and the practices that we participate are the needs of that community, right? So I warn against blanketing practices for all context in order to get a point across. And so I don't convey any type of practices because they may not work. My first question is, what kind of people are these? What kind of group is this? What is our goal here? And that's just the kind of I would guess say facilitator that I am in these spaces. And so I do not give general ones because oftentimes when I do, people still take those and think that this will work. And I often bring people back to explore and understand what community you're trying to speak to, in order to help them with their grief. Because one, you need to be able to name the grief. What is the grief that we're struggling with? Is it all one type of grief, or is it a communal grief, or is it a bunch of individual grieving? And we need community to be able to just explore individual grief. There's levels and layers to it that if I were to offer just one, I tend to not offer practices before we explore culture and community, because that's often one of our problems right now. We like to get together and talk, as opposed to getting together and share, and be in community, because grief is a heavy and a layered thing, because you may pull back one thing and it's actually some other things. That's why grief is its own thing. It's a journey. That's why I say grief ebbs and flows. It surfaces, it comes back, it may not ever go away. So thank you for that question. And Ellie will show my email. If I am willing to be a conversation partner for any of you who want to explore more depth. I just have more questions. I could point you to books, articles all day long, and there are some that are general, that we can, yeah, the Bible and ecology, all of the things we can talk about some of these things. And grief and lament, it's just it's much more layered than that for me. But if you would like for me to expound and talk, let's be a conversation partner. This does not have to end here, nor do you take something and just go place it somewhere. Let's talk about what it's like to be in community as we explore those trust building practices for that community that is grieving.
I love that. I will say that you sound like, I don't know. I just finally took the position of my students. When I was a former teacher, a
Mhm.
student would ask a question, or they'd say something. I'm like, well, go deeper. What do you mean by that? And they
Mhm.
used to hate asking questions because they knew I'd be asking them a question back. Well, what do you mean by that?
Oh yeah, I know. What professors say more. I'm like, I said enough.
What to say?
I used to hate one of my professors. She would always is. She'd be like, say more. And I'd be like, I said everything, but she did. But like you said, I want to go deeper in that, But I love it now because I say it now.
Yeah, the women inside the prison are like, yeah, whenever there's a tiff or something or misunderstanding within the prison unit or yard that we're on, we always remember Ellie in that moment of like, well, tell me more about that. How did it get started? Why did you feel that way?
Well, you're also the chaplain, so that's why you're like, let me reflect that back to you. This is your work.
yeah, you're right. So I think my one final question for you is, well, maybe it's a two-part question. One, what
Okay.
are you grieving right
What am
now?
I grieving?
And then I guess, what are you dreaming of?
Okay, move the screen out the way. I am grieving. I would say, I am grieving. Honestly, I am grieving. I think I've been making peace with making space, but I am grieving that life is currently changing right now. And that we will not that life, and when I say life, I just mean life as we know it, regardless of the outcomes of several of these decisions, whether they're hyper local, all the way to global, um, and the lack of participation in what would happen in formative years. And just grieving just a lot of what you think would happen in moments like these that is not happening, and grieving, um and my grief, and I've been exploring it because I'm like, is it lament? Is it grief? And but I am grieving just the change. Because some things are changing and they're just out of your control. And and I hold on to hope, even though it's like, oof, but I'm dreaming, and I'm dreaming that the world that we know is possible is still possible, right? So I'm holding both of those brutal things in one palm, and it's very hard to hope in times like these, especially when you are just a queer Black woman. Okay, it's very hard to hold on to hope, but I am grieving what what was, but hoping and dreaming about what could be. As we talk about, death and life, some things have to die for a rebirth to happen, and so I am dreaming about that rebirth and what that rebirth will hold.
I appreciate that. And like what Octavia Butler says, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns.
Yeah, our new sons. Come on, Octavia Butler. You better quote Octavia Butler. Yes,
And
yes,
well,
yes.
I just want to thank you so, so, so much for finally saying yes. Because if y'all don't know the other side of this, I have been harassing this poor human for the last 7 or 8 months to get them to do a longer series with us, which is forthcoming for sure in 2026. But really wanted to have this conversation. I know that we got together. You, Lauren, who was last week's guest, and then a local climate scientist here in Tucson, who is a deacon in the Episcopal Church. And we just had a wonderful conversation where everybody had a notepad. We walked away. I think I had like 3 pages of notes from just that short, 50-minute conversation. And so thank you for finally saying yes to this. I'm very grateful. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I much love for I appreciate it. The question, the person who asked the question, I just something dropped in, and I just want to say this, because they asked specifically about what trust building practices, and I I would often say trust is a very hard thing. And what often I find those who end up trusting people in this work are the people who share out of themselves and hold nothing back, right? But you can only do that work if you explore your own personhood, your own epistemology first. And so I find that the trust building practices are the facilitators or the people who are part of it who are willing to work with those people. Forgive me if you hear my dogs. But that I find that the trust building that comes out of that are oftentimes out of sacred stories. And we love sacred stories because it's often someone else telling them, but you have a sacred story as well. And I invite you to start sharing your sacred stories in order to build trust with people, to be in community with them, so that then they may invite you to help walk with them through their grief.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for returning to that question. I love that.
Sure, sure.
Well, beloveds, I trust that you're going to join us for our next webinar, Nurture the Soul webinar. It's a special offering on Monday, April 28th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or I guess it's Eastern Time, who knows, for our final webinar of a 4-part series on Into the Deep. And next week, we're going to be joined by some guests that are talking about braiding worship and justice at our synod. And so I look forward to seeing you all next Monday. And with that, Gabrielle, will you be willing to give us a benediction?
I will, I will, I will. I invite all of you, whether seated or standing, to rise in body and spirit, grounding yourselves where you are, and knowing we hold our siblings who suffer from storms and droughts that are intensified by climate change. We hold all species that suffer. We hold world leaders delegated to make decisions for life. We pray that the web of life may be mended through courageous action. We pray for right actions, for adaptation and mitigation to help our already suffering communities. We pray that love and wisdom might inspire my actions, your actions, our actions as communities, so that we may, with integrity, look into the eyes of our siblings and all beings to truthfully say we are doing our part to care for them and the future of the children. May love transform us and our world with new steps toward life. Go in peace.
Amen and Ashe. Thank you again.
Ashe.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.